Number on the screen was $2,200. That was what the nurse at St. Michael's told me I owed before they could schedule the next round of treatment, not the whole thing. Just the patient co-payment portion that my provincial coverage wouldn't touch. She said it gently, the way people say hard things when they've said them 1,000 times before. She handed me a printed sheet with the breakdown and a number to call if I needed to discuss a payment plan. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket. I drove home on the 401 in the dark, February, the salt spray from the trucks turning my windshield white every few minutes. I kept the radio off. I just drove. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years working trades in Mississauga, electrical, mostly, though I did whatever the foreman needed. I am not a man who asks for help easily. I raised 2 kids in a semi-detached on Confederation Parkway, drove a used truck, took 1 vacation in 15 years. I paid for my son's university, all 4 years at Western. I didn't tell him what it cost me. That's not something a father says out loud. When I got home that night, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I picked up the phone. My son answered on the second ring. I could hear noise in the background, voices, what sounded like a restaurant, maybe a bar. He's 38 now. He runs a property management company out of a glass office on King Street. He drives a car that costs more than I made in 3 years at the peak of my career. I know this not because he told me, but because my daughter mentioned it once, and then looked like she wished she hadn't. I told him what the nurse told me. I kept it simple. I said I needed $2,200 before Friday or the treatment would be postponed indefinitely. I said indefinitely the way the nurse said it to me, because that word does something to the inside of your chest when you hear it in a medical context. It means something worse than what it literally says. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough. He said he was in the middle of something. He said the timing was difficult. He said he'd just put a large deposit down on a property in Oakville and that his liquidity was stretched at the moment. He used the word liquidity. I am his father, and I am 67 years old, and I need $2,200 to stay alive. And he used the word liquidity. Then he said he'd try to look at his accounts over the weekend and see what he could do. The weekend was 5 days away. I said okay. I said I understood. I said good night. I sat there with the phone on the table in front of me for a while after that. The kitchen was quiet. There was a pot I hadn't put away from dinner, still on the stove. I looked at it for a long time without really seeing it. Then I called my daughter. She lives 40 minutes north of me, up past Barrie, in a town small enough that I could walk from one end of the main street to the other in 10 minutes. She works at a hair salon there, Tuesday through Saturday, and she's been doing it for 11 years. She's 34. She drives a 2014 Civic with a dent in the rear quarter panel that she keeps meaning to fix and hasn't yet because there's always something else. She is raising my granddaughter mostly on her own. Her husband left 4 years ago, and I won't say more about him than that. She picked up right away. I hadn't planned to tell her everything. I was going to ask if she was free to talk, ease into it, maybe not even ask for anything, maybe just hear her voice. But something about the way she said Dad, not alarmed, just warm, just present. Something about that undid me a little. I told her about the 2012 dollars. I told her about the conversation with her brother. I tried to keep my voice even and I mostly managed it. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear my granddaughter in the background saying something about a TV show. Then she said, Dad, I'm going to figure it out. Don't worry about Friday. I told her not to do anything rash. I told her I didn't want her putting herself in a bad spot. She said she knew. She said she'd figure it out. She said she'd call me in the morning. She said it the way she says things when she's already made up her mind and is just being polite about the conversation. She called me at 8:15 the next morning. She said she'd gone through her savings account the night before. She had $1,340 in there, money she'd been putting aside for a used transmission for the Civic, because the mechanic told her she'd need one before summer. She said she was going to transfer it to me. She said she'd also talked to a woman she worked with who offered to loan her $500 with no rush on paying it back. And she said she'd taken $40 from the jar she keeps in the kitchen, the one she puts tips into at the end of each shift, all the loonies and toonies and fives that she doesn't let herself touch because it's for my granddaughter's school trip to Ottawa in May. $1,880. She was still $320 short. I told her to stop. I told her I couldn't take the transmission money. I knew what that car meant. She needed it to get to work. And work was how she kept the lights on for herself and for her daughter. She said, "Dad, stop talking." She said she'd already contacted the hospital's financial assistance office that morning. She'd looked it up the night before and called when they opened at 8. She explained the situation and asked if there was any flexibility on the payment timeline or any assistance programs I might qualify for. They told her there was a short-term hardship deferral, 30 days, and that combined with partial payment, Friday's appointment could be kept if I brought $1,600 by Thursday afternoon. She had the $1,600. I didn't know what to say to that. I am not a man who cries easily, and I am telling you I had to put my hand over my mouth and look at the ceiling for a moment before I could speak again. She drove down that Thursday. Didn't tell me she was coming. Just showed up at 10:30 in the morning with my granddaughter in the back seat because school had a PA day. She handed me an envelope. She'd put the money in a card, one of those plain white ones from the drugstore, and on the inside she'd written, in her handwriting that's looked exactly the same since she was 12 years old, "You were always there for us. We're here for you." That's all. She didn't make a speech. She didn't want me to thank her. She put the kettle on and made my granddaughter a piece of toast, and they stayed for 2 hours and we watched a nature documentary about the Canadian Shield that my granddaughter picked, and then they drove back up north. I went to the appointment on Friday. I want to tell you what happened after, because this isn't the end. It's barely even the middle. My son called me that Saturday, 10 days after I'd asked him. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and the paper, and when I saw his name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. I did, though. Old habit. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He asked about the treatment, and I said it had gone ahead as scheduled. There was a pause, and he said, "Oh, good. So you sorted it out then?" Sorted it out. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask who helped me. He said it like a problem at work that resolved itself without needing his attention. He moved on to telling me about the Oakville property, something about the zoning variance coming through, something about projected rental income. I listened. I said very little. When he was done, I said I had to go, and I said goodbye, and I sat there with my coffee gone cold. Something settled in me that day. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter than anger. A kind of clarity. I called my lawyer the following Monday. My will, as it stood, split my estate down the middle, half to each of them. That had been the arrangement for 15 years. I'd set it up when my wife passed, and I'd never revisited it. There wasn't a fortune. There was the house, clear of mortgage now, a modest RRSP, a small life insurance policy, and some money in a TFSA I'd been building slowly, enough to matter to someone who was working hard. Not enough to matter to someone who talked about liquidity on a Tuesday night in a restaurant while his father sat alone at a kitchen table with a piece of paper from the hospital. I didn't make the change out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I made it because it was honest. The will is supposed to reflect your real life, who you are to each other, what you've meant to each other. A document should tell the truth. My lawyer didn't blink. He just asked me what I wanted it to say. I thought about it for a moment, then I told him. My daughter gets the house, not half the house. The RRSP I directed toward a small trust for my granddaughter's education. The TFSA goes to my daughter outright. The life insurance policy remains split. Because I believe in fairness, even when fairness is not returned, and I am not trying to punish anyone. I am trying to be accurate. My lawyer drew it up and I signed it on a Wednesday afternoon in February, in a small office on Hurontario Street with a view of a parking garage. It was one of the most peaceful things I'd done in years. I haven't told my son. I don't intend to. That's not the point. In the months that followed, my treatment continued. The hospital's social work team connected me with a provincial assistance program I hadn't known existed. One specifically for people on fixed incomes managing chronic conditions. The monthly co-payment burden dropped significantly. I applied for it the same week I learned about it, and it came through in April. Between that and the deferral arrangement my daughter had negotiated, I was stable. My daughter called me every Thursday. Not because I asked her to, just because she did. She'd call on her lunch break, usually, and we'd talk for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. My granddaughter's school project, the price of groceries up north, a show she'd been watching, a difficult customer at the salon and how she handled it. Regular things, the kind of things that hold a life together. My son called when he had news to share, about the Oakville property, about a contract he'd landed, about a trip he and his wife were taking. Portugal, I think. Or maybe it was Croatia, I can't remember now. He'd call and talk, and I would listen, and I would be polite because I don't know how to be anything else with my own child, even now, even after everything. But something had changed. He could feel it, I think, even if he couldn't name it. There was a distance in my voice that hadn't always been there, and I wasn't working to close it anymore. I used to do that, work to make him comfortable, laugh at the right moments, ask questions that kept the conversation going. I stopped doing that. I just let the silence be silence. Last October, 8 months after the hospital co-payment, about 6 months after I changed the will, my son came by the house unannounced, a Sunday afternoon. He hadn't done that in a long time. He brought coffee from the drive-thru, the kind I like. He sat down at the kitchen table like he used to when he was younger, and we talked, and for a while it was fine. It felt almost like it used to feel. Then he said something that told me he understood more than he'd let on. He said, "I should have helped you more, in February, I know that." I looked at him. I didn't say anything right away. He said, "I had the money, Dad. You know I had it." I said, "I know." He said, it was complicated. There was a lot going on." I said, "You used the word liquidity." He was quiet. I said, "Your sister sold the money she was saving for her car's transmission. She called the hospital herself and found a program I didn't know about. She drove down here and put cash in an envelope and didn't say a word about it except to put it in a card." I paused. "She had less than anyone and she found a way. You had more than you'll ever need and you told me to wait until the weekend." He didn't argue with that. He just sat there with his coffee and looked at the table. I told him I loved him. I meant it. You don't stop loving your child just because they disappoint you in a way that sits in your bones. You just stop pretending the disappointment isn't there. He left an hour later. We shook hands at the door, which is not something we'd done before, and I watched his car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. I stood there for a minute in the cold with the door still open. And I thought about the night in February when I drove home on the 401 with the radio off and the salt trucks turning my windshield white. I thought about sitting alone at that table with the paper in my pocket. I thought about my daughter saying, without any drama at all, "Dad, stop talking." I went back inside and I called her. She picked up on the second ring. She asked how I was doing and I said I was good, actually. I said I'd had a visit and I'd said some things I'd been meaning to say for a while. She said, "Good for you, Dad." I heard my granddaughter in the background asking if she could talk to me, and my daughter laughed a little and said, "Hold on." And then there was the sound of small hands grabbing a phone, and my granddaughter's voice saying, "Grandpa, I learned a thing about wolves today. Do you want to hear it?" I said I absolutely did. There are people who show up when the number on the screen is $2,200 and Friday is coming, and you don't know how you're going to make it. And there are people who don't. I'm 67 years old and I spent too long not knowing the difference. I know it now. That's the thing about a moment like the one I had, sitting at that table in February with the light on and the pot still on the stove and the paper folded in my pocket. You think it's just a crisis. You think it's just money. But it's not. It's a mirror. It shows you exactly who everyone is when the question is real and the answer costs something. My daughter showed me who she was. She had been showing me for years and I just hadn't been writing it down. I'm writing it down now. I keep coming back to that Thursday morning. My daughter standing in my kitchen, putting the kettle on like it was nothing. My granddaughter asking for toast, the envelope already on the table. She didn't wait to be thanked. She didn't make it into something. She just did what needed doing and moved on to the next thing, which was whether my granddaughter wanted butter or peanut butter. That's the part I think about most, not the money. The way she moved through it. I've lived long enough to understand that the kind of person you become isn't decided in the big moments. The graduations, the promotions, the announcements. It's decided in the small ones, when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when it actually costs you something. My daughter made a decision in her kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, alone, going through a bank account that didn't have much in it. Nobody saw that. Nobody applauded. She just looked at what she had and figured out how to make it work, because that's what she does. That's who she is. That takes something. It takes a kind of honesty with yourself, knowing what matters and being willing to act on it even when it's inconvenient. Even when it means your car might not make it through summer. I've been thinking about that a lot, about what it means to know the right thing and actually do it. Not just intend to do it, not just feel vaguely bad about not doing it, but get up in the morning and call the hospital yourself and find out if there's another way. My son is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. He's a person who got comfortable enough that hard choices stopped feeling urgent. That happens. The distance between having enough and having too much is shorter than people think, and somewhere in that distance you can lose the habit of showing up. You stop practicing it. And then one Tuesday night when it matters, when your father is sitting alone with a piece of paper from the hospital, you use the word liquidity, and you move on to your next meeting, and you tell yourself you'll look at it over the weekend. But there's a cost to that. Not the kind you can see right away. Not money, not reputation, not anything obvious. The cost is what you become when you make that choice. And what you lose. What you've already been slowly losing for years without knowing it. I changed my will and I don't regret it. Not because I want to punish anyone, because I decided, at 67, that I was done pretending that how people treat you doesn't count. That love is just a feeling and not also a behavior. It is both. It has to be both. My daughter will get the house. My granddaughter will have her education covered. That's not a reward exactly. It's just the truth written down in a legal document. It's me finally being accurate about my own life. What I know now, what this year taught me, is that the people worth holding on to are the ones who show up when it costs them. Not the ones who mean well, in theory. The ones who empty the jar of tip money on a Wednesday night and call the hospital at 8 in the morning and drive 40 minutes south with the kid in the back seat and put an envelope on your table and ask if you want tea. Those people exist. If you have one, you know exactly what I mean. Hold on to them. Tell them you see them. Don't wait until there's an envelope on the table to start noticing. I'm writing it down now because I should have started writing it down a long time ago.